All right, let's talk about something huge. In our digital world, with threats seemingly everywhere, how do we actually build stuff that's truly safe? I mean, fundamentally safe. And it's not about just adding more locks after the fact. It's about building a better fortress from the very first stone. So yeah, let's dive right in. Okay, so first step, we've got to look at how things are usually done. And honestly, why it's so flawed. People call it the bolt-on method. And here's a great way to think about it. Imagine the difference between a handyman you call to patch a leaky pipe versus an architect who designs the whole plumbing system so it doesn't leak in the first place. Big difference, right?
And this just nails the point perfectly. I mean, really, how secure is that? You're just nailing a padlock to the outside of a bank vault door. It looks like security, but it's just a cosmetic fix for what could be a really weak door. And believe me, in the digital world, this kind of thinking happens all the time.
See, this whole bolt-on thing is completely reactive. A problem pops up, a data breach, some new nasty virus, and bam, a security patch gets bolted on to fix that one specific thing. It's like having a leaky roof and just patching the holes as they appear instead of, having a solid waterproof roof from the get-go. You're always playing catch-up, always waiting for the next storm.
So let's just put these two ideas side by side, because the difference is night and day. On one side, you have the bolt-on approach. It's reactive, it's clumsy, and it only ever treats the symptoms. But on the other side, you have a totally different way of thinking. It's proactive, it's built in from the start, and it actually tackles the root cause. This is the shift in thinking we're talking about.
All right, so if bolting stuff on later is the problem, then what's the solution? Well, it's about starting to think like that architect we mentioned, and that brings us to the big idea here, security by design. It's all about creating a master blueprint where safety isn't an afterthought, it's a non-negotiable part of the foundation.
So here's the official definition. And the key words you got to remember are from the ground up. This means security isn't just another feature you can check off a list. It's way more fundamental. Think about it. When you build a house, you pour the concrete foundation before you start picking out paint colors, right? One is absolutely essential, and the other, well, that's just a feature you can add on later.
And this image really drives it home. Security isn't just some add-on, it's part of the core architecture. It's like it's woven right into the DNA of the system. It's not a shield you're holding up to defend yourself, it's the armor you're actually made of. It's just part of what it is. Now, this is super important to get. Security by design isn't just some rigid plan or a checklist that you go through and then you're done. No, it's more of a mindset. It's a philosophy, really. It's a way of thinking that shapes every single decision. From the very first line of code somebody writes all the way to the final product that you use. So what does this actually look like in the real world? How does this architect mindset translate into building that digital fortress? Well, it all boils down to a few core principles. Let's break them down. Okay, there are basically four main ideas here. First, and we've said this a few times, you got to build it in from the beginning. Security is a requirement, not a feature. Second, you have to treat the root cause, not just the symptoms. So instead of asking, how do we stop this one specific attack, the question becomes, wait a minute, why is our system vulnerable to this type of attack at all? See the difference? Third, it has to be a continuous process. Things change, new threats pop up, so security has to constantly evolve. And finally, and this one is so important, keep it simple for the user. Because look, the most secure thing in the world is useless if it's a pain to use and nobody wants to deal with it. Okay. So this all might sound a little abstract, maybe something only for engineers to worry about. But why does this matter to you? Well, because pretty much every piece of technology you use was built with one of these two mindsets, and you can definitely feel the difference. I mean, just think about it. Your online banking app, all those smart devices you have in your house, the software that literally runs your car, and what about your personal health records? For all of these things, you absolutely need to know that security was baked in from the start, not just slapped on as an afterthought when something went wrong.
And that's really the bottom line, isn't it? The best kind of security is the security you never even have to think about. It just works. When something is built with security by design from the very start, what you get is the seamless, almost invisible protection. It just quietly does its job in the background, keeping you safe without you ever noticing.
Which brings us to a final really interesting question to chew on. I mean, on the surface, security by design sounds like a no-brainer, right? Of course it's a good idea. But are there downsides? Does building things this way make them more expensive? Does it slow down innovation? It's a great question because it forces us to really think about what we value most when we're building our digital world.
Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about how to build systems that are actually secure. And I'm not talking about just bolting on some security features at the end. No, we're talking about building security right into the foundation from day one. We'll be using some fantastic principles from the National Cybersecurity Center to show us the way. I mean, think about it for a second. Would you build a massive bank vault, seal it all up, and then right at the end go, oh, you know what, we should probably put some locks on this thing? Of course not. That's ridiculous. But honestly, that's exactly how so much of our digital world gets built. Security is treated like an add-on, something you worry about later. And that whole approach is just fundamentally broken. We have to think differently. And that different way of thinking has a name: security by design. Now, this isn't some new software or a complicated checklist. It's a philosophy. It means security isn't just another layer you slap on top. Instead, it's woven right into the DNA of the system, from the very first sketch on a whiteboard to the final product. It's the professional's blueprint for creating something that is inherently strong and resilient from the ground up. Okay, so where do we even begin? Well, the first principle is probably the most critical of all. You have to establish your context. Before you write a single line of code, before you even think about hardware, you need to understand the entire landscape of what you're building. Think of it as the surveying and planning phase before you ever lay a single brick for your fortress. And this first step is, well, it's a big one. You're not just asking, what does this thing do? You have to go way deeper. What data is it touching? Who's using it? And, crucially, what are the things that absolutely, positively cannot be allowed to happen? You've got to learn to think like an attacker, modeling threats to figure out how they could get what they want. You have to map out the entire system, every single stop the data makes, including third-party services where copies of your data might live. This whole phase is about making smart, conscious decisions about risk, balancing security with how usable the system is and how much it costs. And you've got to make sure everyone, including outside suppliers, knows exactly what they're responsible for. This isn't just a rough sketch, it's the detailed architectural blueprint for your entire security plan. All right, once you've done your homework and established the context, it's finally time to start building. The goal of our second principle is super straightforward: make it incredibly difficult for an attacker to break in. This is where we start building the high walls, digging the deep moats, and installing the heavy gates on our digital fortress. You see, real strength doesn't come from some fancy firewall you stick on the edge of your network. True, lasting security is embedded deep inside the system's core. It's in the way that chips are designed, how the software is structured, and in the very logic of how data moves around. Every single piece of the puzzle has to be built with defense in mind. Now, to make compromise difficult, you really need to get your head around this idea of an attack surface. Just picture your fortress. The attack surface is the sum of all your doors, windows, and any other potential way in. Every feature, every user account, every connection to the outside world. It's all part of it. So what's the goal? Simple. Make that surface area as small and as tough to crack as you possibly can. So how do you actually shrink that attack surface? Well, you start by getting rid of everything you don't absolutely need. An unused feature? To an attacker, that's just an unmonitored backdoor waiting to be discovered. A default password? That's like leaving the key under the doormat. You've got to eliminate all those easy wins. Another huge one is isolating your most powerful users, your admins. They should not be checking their email and surfing the web on the same machine they use to run the entire network. And finally, you have to make security easy for your users, because if security procedures are too complicated, people will find ways around them, and those workarounds, they're the vulnerabilities attackers just love to find. Okay, so we've made it tough to get in. Awesome. But what if a really determined attacker does manage to launch an assault? Well, that brings us to principle number 3. A truly secure system isn't just hard to break into, it's also resilient. It's designed to withstand an attack and keep on running. Think about it. A system that completely falls apart at the first sign of trouble isn't really secure, is it? No matter how strong its walls are. Resilience means that even when things get chaotic, whether it's a massive denial of service attack or just an internal component failing, the essential services keep going, the lights stay on. Building for resilience is really all about planning for failure. It means having backup systems ready to kick in at a moment's notice. It means designing your system so it can handle huge, unexpected spikes in traffic. And it means you've got to find your weak spots and bottlenecks before an attacker does. You also have to think about your dependencies. What happens if your cloud provider has an outage? If you don't have a plan B for that, your system isn't truly resilient. So let's get to our final principle, This one comes with a dose of reality, a hard truth: no system, and I mean no system, is 100% impenetrable. A smart, motivated attacker might eventually find a way through. So your design has to be built on the assumption that a breach will happen, and you need to be ready to spot it instantly and contain the damage immediately. This really is a two-part strategy. On one side, you've got detection. This means you need amazing visibility into what's happening. You're logging everything important, and, crucially, you know what normal looks like, so you can spot something weird the second it happens. Then, on the other side, you've got impact reduction. This is all about containment. You segment your network so that a fire in one room doesn't burn down the whole house. You design things so that you can recover quickly from a clean backup. This 1-2 punch of detection and containment is what turns a potential catastrophe into just a manageable incident. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Security by design isn't just about stopping bad guys. When you build security into the core of a system, the entire thing just gets better. It's more stable, it's more dependable for the people who use it, and it builds the kind of trust that, in our digital world, is absolutely priceless. It's an investment that pays off big time, not just in security, but in reliability and value over the long haul. And that really just leaves us with one last question for you to think about. In your own projects, at your job, or even in your own digital life, is the security you rely on a solid foundation, or is it just a bunch of locks bolted on as an afterthought? Because the answer to that question could truly make all the difference. Thanks for joining me.
Hey there, and welcome. So today, we're going to do something kind of cool. We're going to build a digital fortress. We'll be diving into a big idea called security by design, which is all about a proactive, not reactive, approach to cybersecurity. Forget the boring, abstract stuff. We're going to get our hands dirty and actually lay the bricks for a system that's built to be secure from the ground up. Let's get into it.
All right, first things first, we need a major mindset shift. You know, the old way of thinking was all about building these supposedly impenetrable walls. But let's be real, in today's world, nothing is truly impenetrable. The modern approach, the smart approach, accepts that an attack is pretty much inevitable. So the real goal isn't just to keep people out, it's to build a fortress that can actually withstand a siege.
And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If we know for a fact that the attack is coming, how in the world do we design a system that can take the hit, spot the trouble, and contain the damage? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down today. We're going to walk through the 4 key pillars of building our digital fortress.
All right, part 1, hardening the walls. Our first job is to build some seriously strong outer defenses. The goal here is pretty straightforward. Make it as difficult as humanly possible for an attacker to get even a tiny foothold. You've got to make them work for it. And that defense starts right at the main gate.
Here is rule number 1, and it is non-negotiable. Every single piece of data that comes from the outside, we're talking file uploads, emails, API calls, you name it, is a potential Trojan horse. You have to treat all of it as hostile until you can prove it's safe. That means having a super rigorous checkpoint to sanitize anything and everything before it's allowed inside. So how do you actually do that? Well, it's basically a 3-step process. First up is transformation. You know how complex files like PDFs can hide all sorts of malicious code, right? So you transform them into a much simpler, safer format. Then comes validation. This is where you just check if the data looks right. Is this field supposed to be a number? Is that text way too long? Simple stuff. And finally, you render it safe. If you're still not sure, you open it up in a secure, disposable sandbox. Think of it as a little isolated room, far away from anything important.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit and talk about the architecture of our fortress. Imagine a castle with 100 different doors and windows. It would be an absolute nightmare to defend, right? Well, in cybersecurity, we call all those potential entry points the attack surface. And the logic is simple. The smaller your attack surface, the fewer places you have to guard, and the stronger your defense is going to be.
So how do we shrink it? Well, you start bricking up those unnecessary windows. You get rid of default accounts and any features you're not using. You only work with vendors you absolutely trust. You give your system admins separate, super locked down accounts just for those high-level tasks. And, maybe most importantly, you design the system so that being secure is the easy option for everybody. Every little step you take makes an attacker's job that much harder. Okay, so our walls are strong, but a really persistent attacker, they might still find a way through. So our next pillar of defense is all about making sure the fortress can actually weather the storm. It's about building a system that doesn't just crumble under pressure, but can keep on functioning even in the middle of an attack. Just look at the difference here between a brittle system and a resilient one.
A brittle system, well, it's rigid. It shatters under pressure. But a resilient system? It's flexible. It's designed to bend, not break. It anticipates failures, so it's got backups ready to go, it's built to scale, and it gets updated in lots of small, manageable steps. So how do you actually build that kind of resilience? Well, you don't just cross your fingers and hope for the best. You test for it. And this is where it gets really cool. Netflix famously created a tool called Chaos Monkey, and its job is to randomly shut down parts of their live system. It forces their engineers to build a network that can just shrug off that kind of failure. The lesson here? You have to break your own stuff before an attacker does it for you.
And listen, a fortress isn't an island. It's only as strong as its supply lines. Your system probably relies on all sorts of third-party services, for payments, hosting, whatever. So you have to ask yourself, what happens if they go down? A truly resilient design thinks about these external weak spots and has a plan B, and probably a plan C ready to go.
Okay, even with the strongest walls and the most resilient design, a clever intruder might still slip inside. And that brings us to our third pillar, sounding the alarm. This is where we set up our watchtowers and our sentries. This section is all about making it super easy to spot an intruder the second they're inside. Now, this is such a simple but powerful idea. Think about it. You can't spot something weird if you don't know what normal looks like. And that's the whole concept behind a system baseline. By always monitoring your network traffic, your data usage, just how your system generally behaves, you create a really clear picture of what normal is. Any little deviation from that baseline, bam, that's an immediate red flag.
So how do we get good at spotting these things? Well, for starters, you log everything, so you always have a breadcrumb trail. You design simple, predictable communication paths so that a weird connection really stands out. And this is crucial. Your monitoring system has to be totally separate from the system it's watching. You don't want the fox guarding or disabling the henhouse alarm. And of course, you're always on the lookout for anything trying to phone home to an attacker. That's a classic giveaway.
The objective here is pure stealth. You want your detection to be so good, so subtle, that you can spot the attacker, track what they're doing, figure out their goal, all before they have any clue that you're onto them. And this brings us to our final layer of defense. The alarm has sounded. An intruder is inside the fortress. Now what? This part is all about damage control. It's about limiting their movement and making absolutely sure you protect your crown jewels.
We're back to that core mindset again, right? We have to assume the breach is going to happen. The question isn't about whether you failed anymore. The real test is, can you contain it? If an attacker gets into one room, can you slam the door shut and stop them from getting to all the others?
And here's how you do it. You build internal walls, blast doors inside your fortress. A segmented network means a breach in one zone stays locked in that zone. You get rid of any extra tools or functions that an attacker could turn around and use against you. And you design for super fast recovery, so it's easy to wipe a compromised system and rebuild from a clean state. It is all about minimizing the blast radius.
So as we wrap this up, if there's one thing you take away, let it be this. Security by design isn't some product you can just go out and buy, and it's not a checklist you can just tick off. It's a philosophy. It's a mindset. It's about thinking about security at every single stage of the process, from the very first idea to the final launch. It's about being proactive, not reactive.
And that leaves us with one final question for you to think about. Whether you're thinking about your personal computer, your small business, or a massive system you work on, just take a second to look at it through this lens. What's the weakest wall in your digital fortress? And what's one thing you can do today to start making it stronger? Thanks for watching.
How do you design a cybersecurity system for an industrial plant? You know, a place where a digital breach could cause a real-world physical disaster? We're going to build a cyber fortress, piece by piece. So let's meet our case study. It's a company we'll call PaperCorp. Now, these guys are on the cutting edge, making a brand new type of paper called PaperX. The key thing to understand here, though, is how they make it. It's a continuous chemical process, which means it is always on and it's incredibly complex. And here's the kicker. The raw ingredients for this fancy new paper, they're volatile. We're not just talking about protecting customer lists or secret formulas here. A smart cyber attack could mess with that chemical process, and the results could be, well, catastrophic in the real world. And that brings us to the big question for this whole explainer. When that line between the digital world and the physical world gets this blurry, how on earth do you build your defenses? It's a super high-stakes problem, and it means we have to think about security in a totally different way. For PaperCorp, it all boils down to two things that are completely non-negotiable. Number one, safety. There can be absolutely no chemical leaks into the local environment, period. And number two, availability. They have to keep the production line for Paper X running or they go out of business. So whatever we design has to be both incredibly safe and incredibly reliable. Now, to pull that off, we can't just be running around putting out fires. We have to be proactive. This means we have to completely shift our mindset, right? We have to stop thinking like a firefighter who rushes to a blaze and start thinking like an architect who designs a building to be fireproof from the very beginning. You see, the old way of doing things, building the whole system and then trying to bolt security on at the end, it's broken. For a system this critical, that's like building a skyscraper and only starting to worry about the foundation when you're already on the 50th floor. It makes no sense. And that leads us to our core philosophy. It's called security by design. And really, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's an approach where security isn't just another feature you check off a list at the end. No, it's part of the blueprint. It's woven into the very fabric of the hardware and the software right from day one. So what does that actually mean? Well, it boils down to three big ideas. First, you build security in, you don't just patch it on later. Second, you go after the root cause of a potential problem, not just the symptoms you see on the surface. And finally, and this is a big one, you have to accept that security is never done. It's a constant, evolving process. Okay, so that's the philosophy, but how do we actually put it into practice? Well, we're going to start with the first layer of our fortress, making it as difficult as humanly possible for an attacker to get in. It's time to fortify the digital gates. Our first principle sounds simple, but it is incredibly powerful. We need to reduce the attack surface. Think of it this way. The more doors and windows your house has, the more ways a burglar can get in. Our job is to find every single door and window that doesn't absolutely need to be there and board it up for good. For PaperCorp, this has some really clear, practical steps. First, we get rid of all the default user accounts and passwords. Gone. Second, every single software vendor gets carefully vetted. We only use trustworthy sources. And this is so important. The people who have admin control over the plant, they get special, isolated accounts. That means they can't browse the internet or check their email from the same terminal that controls the chemical mix. I mean, just think about it. Every single feature, every service that's running, every network connection, each one is a potential doorway for an attacker. The fewer of those doorways that exist, the safer the whole system becomes. We're shrinking the target. All right, our second principle builds right on top of that first one. We have to validate all external inputs. The mindset here is basically zero trust. You assume that every single piece of data trying to get into your network is malicious, until you can prove, without a doubt, that it's safe. So what's that look like? Well, imagine a PDF comes in from a supplier. We don't just scan it for viruses. We actually transform it, rebuild it, into a safer, simpler format, which strips out any hidden malicious code. Every chunk of data is inspected to make sure its structure is exactly what we expect. This stops those clever attacks that try to hide inside weirdly formatted data. Okay, so we've made it really tough to get in. But let's be realistic. No fortress is ever 100% impenetrable. So the next part of our plan has to assume that an attacker might eventually get through. How do we make sure we can weather that storm? And how do we spot them if they're trying to hide in the dark? And this leads us to principle number 3, which ties right back to one of PaperCorp's critical needs, availability. We have to design the entire system to make disruption difficult. The whole point is to keep that chemical process running safely even while we're under attack. So how do you do that? Well, for starters, redundancy is everything. You need standby control systems that are ready to take over in a split second. You need regular, isolated data backups. The system also has to be scalable, so that if an attacker throws a flood of junk traffic at it in what's called a denial of service attack, it doesn't just fall over. We even have to think about what happens if one of our suppliers gets hit. What's our plan if our main internet connection goes down? And that brings us to our fourth principle, which forces us to accept a really hard truth about cybersecurity. Sooner or later, you're probably going to get breached. It's almost inevitable. So if you can't guarantee you'll keep them out forever, the goal has to be to contain the damage. We have to reduce the impact of a successful attack. Probably the most powerful tool for this is something called network segmentation. Think of it like building digital firewalls inside our fortress. So if an attacker gets into the front office network, there's no easy path for them to jump over to the factory control network. We're also stripping out any and all unnecessary features from those critical systems. And finally, we design for a quick recovery, a plan to completely wipe and rebuild a compromised system from a known clean state in a matter of minutes, not days.
Okay, we have covered a ton of ground. We've got our core philosophy and our 4 key design principles. So let's pull all of these threads together and see what the final security blueprint for PaperCorp actually looks like.
And this is really where the magic happens. You can see the direct line between the principle and the protection. By reducing the attack surface, isolating those admin systems, we stop a simple phishing email from turning into a chemical leak. By making disruption difficult with redundant systems, we make sure ransomware can't just shut down the whole plant. And by reducing the impact with a segmented network, we ensure that a simple malware infection in the office doesn't become a full-blown crisis in the factory. And this quote really sums up the entire modern cybersecurity mindset. Perfection is a myth. Prevention is absolutely critical. But resilience, the ability to take a hit and keep on taking safely, that is the ultimate goal. We're not just trying to prevent a breach, we're designing a system that can survive one. So by following this whole security by design approach, PaperCorp doesn't just get a secure network. They get a system that actually delivers on those 2 critical requirements from the very beginning. It protects their ability to do business, which protects their profits. But more importantly, it protects their employees and the community around them from a potentially devastating accident. So I'll leave you with this last question to think about. The principles we've just applied to this fictional paper factory, they're the exact same principles that should apply to the real-world critical systems we all rely on every single day. Things like our power grids, water treatment plants, hospitals. The question we all need to be asking is, were they designed with this kind of security in mind from the start? So let's talk about building something new. Maybe it's a piece of software or a whole new network. Where does security fit into that plan? Is it right there in the blueprint from day one? Or is it more of an emergency patch you slap on after the first disaster hits? Believe me, the path you choose has massive, and I mean massive, consequences. And this really is the core question, isn't it? Is security just an afterthought, or is it baked into the blueprint from the very beginning? This isn't just some techie, abstract question. It's really a philosophical one for any organization. Do we build to be resilient, to anticipate threats? Or do we just cross our fingers, hope for the best, and figure we'll clean up the mess later? That single choice can define everything. Okay, so this whole choice really just boils down to 2 paths, 2 fundamentally different approaches. You can either be proactive or you can be forced to be reactive. Let's dig in and see what that actually looks like. So on the one hand, you've got this proactive by design mindset. This is all about thinking ahead, right? Building strong, secure systems from the ground up. Then, on the other hand, there's being reactive by default. And let's be honest, that isn't even a real strategy, is it? It's just chaos. It's what happens when you don't have a plan. You're just constantly playing catch-up, which is exhausting, inefficient, and leaves the door wide open for trouble. And here's the thing, falling into this reactive path is so easy. It is a total trap. It means you're not actually building a fortress. You're just running around putting out fires. You're always on the defensive, always on your back foot, and never really in control of your own systems. So what is a reactive approach, really? It means you're scrambling to deal with attacks while they're happening, or even worse, after they've already done their damage. You're not stopping threats from getting in. You're just cleaning up the wreckage they leave behind. And you might think this is rare, but it is shockingly common. I mean, for most businesses, cybersecurity only gets serious attention after it's too late, after there's been a breach. It's always that we'll deal with it later problem, until later suddenly arrives as a full-blown, wallet-draining crisis. So what's the actual price you pay for getting stuck in this reactive mode? Well, it's not just one thing. It's more like a domino effect, a whole cascade of consequences that can ripple through and mess up an entire organization. First off, with a reactive stance, the bad guys can do a ton of damage before you even realize they're in the building. And because security wasn't baked in from the start, guess what else is probably missing? A recovery plan. So what you get is this slow, chaotic mess where everyone's just trying to make it up as they go along, right when the pressure is at its absolute highest. But it's not just about being vulnerable, It goes deeper than that. It's just fundamentally inefficient. Think about it. When you try to just bolt security on later, you're not really fixing the problem. You're actually compromising the whole system from the inside out. You just can't build something truly great and effective on a shaky, insecure foundation. It just doesn't work. Okay, so we've talked about the immediate damage of an attack, but there's something else, something quieter, and frankly, a lot more dangerous in the long run. A weak security posture doesn't just hit your bank account. It can literally cost you your future. And this right here, this gets to the absolute heart of it. When your own team doesn't have confidence in your security, the whole company gets, well, timid. You start shying away from making bold moves and taking the kind of calculated risks that are absolutely essential for innovation and growth. You end up with a culture of fear instead of a culture of progress. Let me give you a perfect example. Say a company sees the huge potential in something like artificial intelligence to completely change their business for the better, but they pump the brakes. Why? Because they're worried about security. Their weak foundation means they have to pass on this game-changing tech, while their competitors, the ones who built security in from day one, they're racing ahead. So, yeah. Hindsight is expensive, isn't it? After looking at all this, it's pretty clear that the only real, sustainable path forward is to get out of that reactive trap for good and start being intentional about building a proactive security blueprint. And it's such a classic case of false economy, right? You know, when you skip on security at the beginning because it seems cheaper or faster, that shortcut always ends up costing you way, way more down the road. We're talking real money, a damaged reputation, and all those missed opportunities you were too scared to take. So I want to leave you with this question to think about. Now that we've walked through all the risks, the inefficiency, and the way it just kills innovation, what really are the consequences of kicking that security can down the road? It's a question every single organization out there has to answer for itself, hopefully before it's too late.
Seriously, think about that for a second. Would you? Of course not. That'd be an absolute nightmare. It would be a huge mess, it cost a fortune, and you'd literally have to tear apart the walls just to get the essentials in. And yet, for a long time, this is pretty much how a lot of organizations have handled cybersecurity, as something you just kind of tack on at the end. This one question really gets to the heart of the whole proactive versus reactive debate.
So what exactly is security by design? Well, you can think of it as a philosophy. It's this commitment to bake security right into the DNA of a system from the very, very beginning, from the blueprint stage, instead of just bolting it on later and, crossing your fingers.
And this really lays out the two different worlds, right? On one side, you've got security as an afterthought. It's reactive, it's often just about checking off boxes on some compliance form. But with security by design, totally different story. It becomes proactive. It's not about some generic checklist. It's about building a defense system that's tailored to the actual risks your organization is facing.
Okay, so what's the payoff for all of this upfront work? I mean, what do you actually get for building security in from the very start? Well, it turns out the advantages are pretty significant.
I mean, it just makes sense, right? When security is part of the foundation, the entire structure is just stronger. It's more resilient. You're not running around patching holes. You're building a fortress from the ground up.
The business case for this is it's incredibly strong. First off, and this is the big one, it is so much cheaper to fix a problem on a blueprint than it is to knock down a wall. Finding security issues in the design phase saves a ton of money down the road. You also get to tailor everything to your specific needs, not some one-size-fits-all solution. And, this is crucial, you can actually budget for it properly from day one. It becomes a planned investment instead of some crazy, unexpected emergency expense.
Okay, so this all sounds amazing, doesn't it? A stronger system, a cheaper system in the long run, a more effective system. You're probably sitting there thinking, all right, what's the catch? And you know what? That's a fair question, because there's always a catch.
And that brings us to the other side of the coin, the upfront price. Let's get real for a minute about the challenges and the investment that this whole approach actually demands.
So, while the final product might be clean and secure, getting started can feel a lot more complex. You're suddenly juggling more pieces of the puzzle, you're planning for things that might happen way down the line. It just takes a different kind of discipline right from the get-go.
So here's the fine print. The initial costs? Yeah, they're higher. You're investing more in planning, more in specialized expertise. That means you can also take longer to actually build and launch your product. And this last point, this is a big one. What happens if the business completely changes direction? You run the risk of having designed a perfect, super secure system for a company that doesn't even exist anymore in 5 years.
But look, this isn't a dead end. The challenges are definitely real,
but they're not impossible to solve. And this is where the whole approach really shifts from being a simple choice to being a calculated, strategic investment in your future.
So how do you handle that biggest drawback we just talked about, the risk of your system becoming obsolete? Well, you design it to evolve. The key is to build systems that can be adapted and updated without having to shut the whole thing down. You basically build it for resilience, and you build it for change.
And really, that's what this all boils down to. This isn't just a decision for the IT folks. It's a decision for the entire business. Are you building an organization that's constantly just reacting and putting out fires? Or are you building one that's resilient enough to prevent them from starting in the first place? So, I'll leave you with a question to chew on. Think about the apps on your phone, the software you use for work, even your Wi-Fi network at home. Can you see the fingerprints of security by design, or can you see the cracks where it's missing? What do you think is the real price of proactive security in your world?